There are many people that I coach that know they should hire, that know they need help, that know that the law of delegation works, but they don't do it because they don't ever want to have a conversation like this.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris, your humble host of the Appraiser Coach Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Before we get started, I want to remind you that we're sponsored by three great companies, Alamode being one. They lead the world in report writing software. It's alamode.com or 800 Alamode. Of course, the great company Synapse or Spark. Spark4appraisers.com is where you go to learn out more about Synapse or Spark. And finally, Working RE magazine. Working RE is helping everyone to be informed as to what's going on in the appraisal world. It's workingre.com, workingre.com. All right, folks, let's say that you've taken my advice over the years and you decided that it is well in your interest to hire help, right? The law of delegation at work. You finally say, I'm done doing it myself. I'm going to reach out. I'm going to go through the process of finding someone, hiring someone, signing a contract with someone, managing someone, training them, and it's just not working out. I know. You think if you go through all of that correctly that it would just work out perfectly, but I'm here to tell you that it doesn't always turn out that way, unfortunately. Now, I will say this. If you go through those steps and you are meticulous about the process, you've heard me say this before, you fire slow, or you fire fast, hire slow, fire fast, right? The hire slow part has to do with crossing your T's and dotting your I's. That you don't just go out and find the person and put them in the seat. And often I see people finding the person and finding the seat for them. Don't do that. What do I mean by that? Well, Aunt Margaret wants a job, needs a job. I don't really have a job for her, but I'm sure I could find something, right? Not the right approach, trust me. But I often see that appraisers go through this process and they are not meticulous enough in the way that they hire. They need somebody and they need somebody now. They're busy, they're overwhelmed, they're drowning. And it's at that point they finally say, okay, mercy. I've listened to this fat bald guy for long enough talk about the law of delegation. I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to dive in head first. I'm going to find somebody. And I need somebody yesterday. So you know what? I'm going to find the first heartbeat out there. And if they can fog up a glass, they're hired. Folks, trust me when I say a lot of appraisers and business owners in general lose a lot of money doing it that way. A lot of individuals really have a hard time because they just don't go through the process that they should in getting to where they need to go. Okay? And that is a slow enough process that they cross their T's and dot their I's. There is a hiring process, and I've talked about it before. In fact, I have not just one, but several webinars on my website on how to hire and how to do it properly. But even if you go through all the steps to hire slow, you cross your T's, you dot your I's, guess what? Sometimes it just doesn't work out. Now, let's say you're in that position. Let's say that you've gone through the process, you've hired slow, you followed all of what you should have there, and let's just say that it just still doesn't work out. You hire this individual and they either over-dramatized, overemphasized their resume, or for whatever reason you misunderstood who they were. Okay? And you're in this situation that's a little bit challenging at this point because they're feeling somewhat comfortable. I mean, you did hire them, you did sign a contract, and you're not so comfortable because, hey, what you hired them to do is not getting done well. Where do you go from there? Well, folks, you've got to talk to people. You've got to have that talk. Now, let me tell you what I often see individuals do that I highly recommend that you avoid. And that is avoiding the conversation. I often see that individuals, because let's just put it on the line, right? We don't want to be mean. We want to be seen as the nice guy or the nice gal. We want to be nice to people. We don't like to tell people that they're not doing a good job. That's just a natural thing. It comes naturally that we don't want to be the meanie. And as a consequence, we sometimes, to our detriment and theirs, avoid that conversation. Or we have that conversation nonchalantly, right? We're driving down the road. You're about to get lunch at McDonald's in between your inspections. You're with your trainee who just is not getting it. And you say, it'd be nice if we can maybe get this. right? It would be nice if we get to the point that we're on the same page here. And then you order your chocolate shake and your Big Mac and you move on, right? In other words, it's a throwaway comment, or it's a comment in between other important things that doesn't really have the emphasis that it should. Folks, when you get to the point, now there's nothing wrong with those comments, right? There's nothing wrong with the reminders and the training and everything else. But if you are at the point that you're seriously considering letting this person go, you're seriously wondering if you made the right decision with this person, folks, you've got to have a more serious conversation, and I highly recommend that it be a sit-down conversation. And when I say sit down, I don't necessarily mean literally, right? If you've got a stand-up desk or what have you, I'm not talking about a sit-down conversation in the sense that you're physically sitting on a chair. And by the way, a lot of us have virtual offices anyway. This conversation does not necessarily have to be in person, though I highly recommend, if it can be, that it should be. But what I'm saying is this needs to be a scheduled conversation. This needs to be a, hey, Joan, we need to have a sit down. We need to talk. I am concerned about several things, and I want to let my concerns be known. This is the kind of conversation that you have, pre-conversation, that you have previous to the actual conversation. Folks, if this is just a nonchalant throwaway conversation that you might be giving to someone, that's the way they're going to take it. Meaning, if you don't take it seriously, they're not going to take it seriously. And we're talking about the point that we are at the point of no return. This is either make or break. Let's call it an ultimatum. This is an ultimatum conversation. You've had the training, you've had the conversations multiple times about things you're concerned about, but things are not changing, or at least they're not changing to the level that you're going to feel comfortable giving this person a paycheck long term. Now, speaking of which, let me just divert just a little bit and talk about the second part of that phrase that I gave you at the first of the broadcast. The first thing that I said was, I am a big believer in hiring slow and firing fast. Okay, we've already talked and discussed what it means to hire slow. Let's talk briefly about what it means to fire fast. Just as I see people hiring too quickly, they're in need, they're drowning, they reach out, they grab the first warm body that they can find. I also see people, because again, we're nice people, we don't want to be seen as the meanie that destroyed someone's life, right? So we hang on to people way too long. Let me say something that I believe with all of my heart. This is from my own experience, on both sides of the table, by the way. And this is from my experience as a coach. You are doing them a disfavor to keep them on longer than they need to be. It does your business a disfavor. It does them a disfavor. It does everyone a disfavor. Folks, trust me when I say, if it's not going to work out, you need to let them go sooner rather than later. So how do you go about having that conversation? Well, step number one, again, just to reiterate, put it on the table. You've got to have a pre-conversation. And what I mean by pre-conversation is you need to have a conversation about having a conversation. That's going to put the emphasis on it that you need. Now, that can be a text, that can be a phone call, that can be a Slack message, that can be whatever you want it to be. But it needs to be very poignant that, hey, Joan, we need to sit down and we need to have a conversation because I'm having some concerns. By the way, I have this conversation. I'm recording this on a Monday. I had this conversation with somebody on a Friday. Now, it was not an appraiser, or it wasn't in my appraisal business, but in my investment side, I have a VA, and I had to sit down with that VA, and we had a serious conversation. And it started out by saying, hey, Pete, we need to have a conversation very soon because I'm very concerned about some things. Right? In other words, we prefaced it that this is not a lighthearted conversation. I want you to take this seriously because I'm taking this seriously. That's the reason for the pre-conversation. I want you to take this seriously because this is a serious matter that I am taking seriously. So let's get on the same page with the seriousness of this conversation, and let's set a time for 2 o'clock this afternoon when we either sit down via Zoom or face-to-face or what have you. If it needs to be on the phone, it needs to be on the phone. But you need to have a conversation about having the conversation so they can realize, oh, okay, this is serious. I need to make sure that I come and bring my game face. Okay, that's number one. Number two, folks, trust me when I say sometimes it is best to just be honest. Okay, it is hard. It is difficult. For most people, this is a very, very challenging. And in fact, there are many people that I coach. I would go so far as to say this, that should hire, but they don't because of this very conversation. Let me repeat that. There are many people that I coach that know they should hire, that know they need help, that know that the law of delegation works, but they don't do it because they don't ever want to have a conversation like this. They don't want to be in charge of somebody. They don't want to have to be the boss. They don't want to have to come to the table and say, you're not performing, and we need to talk about that, and we need to change some things. They don't want to have that conversation, so they avoid the law of delegation altogether. Now, folks, I will tell you, let me just be vulnerable here for just a little bit, okay? I very much have spent most of my life in that camp. I have very much been told by my mentor and others, don't hire because it is challenging and difficult to have to manage other people. And I believed it. And because I knew myself, I knew I was a quote unquote nice guy, I didn't want to have to go through that process. Now, folks, Just because you've learned to manage just because you've learned to be a boss doesn't mean that you've gone from being a nice guy to a mean guy. Okay, and I mean guy as in guy and gal. All right, we're gender neutral here. The point is that management is a skill. Being able to manage other people is something that can be learned. I know I'm a walking, talking, breathing example of it. I spent many, many years, the first couple of years when I was hiring, being afraid to have those conversations. It still is not comfortable. The honest truth is, I told Pete in the morning that I needed to talk to him, and it was probably 3:30, 4 o'clock before I finally got around to it. Not because I couldn't have squeezed it in earlier. Yeah, I was busy, but really I didn't want to have the conversation. I kept putting it off, right? I still hate having these conversations, but, and there's a big but here, right? I still am a huge believer that having these conversations is the right way to go. I'll tell you another right way to go if you want help with your report. And I'm talking about filling your report with minimal effort. I'm talking hitting a couple of buttons. Now, there's a big confusion out there about Spark. The big confusion is that Spark chooses this data for you. Folks, trust me when I say that Spark leaves you in complete control as the appraiser. You make the hard decisions. It does the easy work. Well, it's the hard work if you do it, but the easy work if you don't, by letting Spark fill in your report for you. We're talking the subject data. We're talking the comps. We're talking the MC data. We're talking stats. We're talking amazing things that this company can do for your appraisal office. Check them out by going to spark4appraisers.com. Again, it's Spark, F-O-R, appraisers.com. Ultimatum is, 30 plus years. They've been helping appraisers to be the very best that they could be because the built-in tools with Ultimatum are different than all of the tools out there combined. And we're talking amazing tools that allow you efficiency without cutting quality. In fact, you'll have better quality reports and faster reports with Ultimatum. Check them out by going to their website, ultimatum.com, or you can pick up the phone and call them at 800-ULTIMATUM. Finally, we're sponsored by Working RE Magazine here. Working RE is helping appraisers to be informed. Folks, there's a lot of racial stuff going on out there, lawsuits, different things going on, accusations. I'm telling you, Working RE will help you to be informed as to what is going on in your chosen industry. Check them out by signing up for their free newsletter. It's workingre.com. Just wait, 20 seconds when you go to their website. Not even that, 10 seconds. A little box will pop up, say, hey, do you want to subscribe? You do. Put your email in there. Trust me, folks, they're not going to spam you. You're going to get some great information at workingre.com. Welcome back to the program. Talking today about that conversation, right? The conversation that you don't like to have, but you should have. You know what I'm talking about. You've hired that person, you think they're great, and you learn very quickly they're not so great, right? You learn that there's really some struggles going on. You think, did I really screw up here? Folks, maybe not necessarily. By having this conversation, one of two things is going to happen, right? And we're talking about that ultimatum conversation that, hey, Joan, this isn't working out. I want it to work out, but if it doesn't work out, I'm going to have to let you go. That conversation. One of two things is going to happen when you have that conversation, folks. And either one is going to benefit you and them. And this is the key. We avoid having this conversation because we don't want to hurt feelings, folks. But I'm telling you, it's going to hurt feelings more to keep somebody on that should not be on. Trust me. If they need to go, they need to go. So one of two things is going to happen when you have this conversation. Number one, they're either going to realize what they've done wrong or are not doing right is probably a better, more positive spin on it. And they're going to start doing that thing, or they're not, and they're going to have to be let go. Either one is a benefit for you, my friends. Let me repeat that. Either option is good for you. I learned long ago a trick when it comes to raising my kids. And that is, kids like choices, right? They like to choose between A and B. Parents don't like choices because they want their child to choose A, not B. But if you can learn to give them two choices that are absolutely, totally fine with you, maybe you have a slight preference on one or the other, but not really. Folks, I'm telling you, raising kids with choices is a much better way to raise kids. The example that I'll give you is, let's say the kids are out jumping on the trampoline and it's almost time for dinner, right? Why not hop out the door and say, hey, kids, you got their attention, they're looking at you. Would you like to come in for dinner in 5 minutes or 3 minutes, right? Now, either one is perfectly fine with you, yet they have a conversation with themselves and a decision to make. Now, most likely they're going to choose the 5 minutes. But if you wanted them to come in 5 minutes anyway, guess what? They just made a choice that you wanted them to make by giving them another choice that was maybe slightly more preferable to you, but not really. The same is true with this kind of a conversation. When you sit down with your employee that's not doing so well and you give them two choices, either one is going to be good. Now, it's not going to be a fun thing to let someone go, but folks, it's still the right thing to do. So when you say, hey, Joan, we got to have this conversation, and you have that conversation, and Joan says, oh, you know what? And I'm not saying that she says this verbally, but her actions in the coming weeks show that she didn't pay attention to the conversation, she didn't take it seriously, or she just couldn't do it, right? She just didn't have the ability to do it, right? And she gets let go. Trust me, folks, this is for the better. Or on the other side, she does take it seriously, she does shape up and stays put and does the great job you want her to do. Guess what? Either outcome is a good outcome for you. Either outcome is a good outcome for them as well. Well, Dustin, how could letting someone go be a good outcome for them? Well, I'll tell you, folks, I've let a lot of people go over the years, and never once after, and sometimes I don't always know, but if I do catch up with them later on, 9 times out of 10, they're in a better position than they were with me anyway. It wasn't a good fit, and thus it wasn't working out. So either way is going to be a positive thing for you and for them. Okay, let's get to the meat of the matter today. We're talking about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. If you've ever read the book, you know what I'm talking about. There's two, well, let's just call them bipolar personalities or schizophrenic personalities here, right? Okay, so you've got the Dr. Jekyll, you've got the Mr. Hyde, one mild-mannered, one friendly, one not so much, okay? Now, if you will take a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde approach to this conversation, trust me, folks, this is the way to do it. Let me explain what I mean. What you need to do in this conversation is verbally be the kind and gentle and loving person that you are. Now, I'm not saying you make this up. Hopefully you are that person, right? You don't want to have this conversation, but there's nothing wrong with being friendly about the conversation. Saying things like, Joan, I hired you because fill in the blank, right? I hired you because you had excellent communication skills. I hired you because your resume was incredible. I hired you because you're my neighbor and I like you. Okay, whatever the case may be. Start with that. I hired you because. Follow up with, I really want this to work. Now, at that point, they're going to be a little on edge, like, and, or, but. I mean, what's coming here, okay? But I think it's important on the friendly side to make sure that they understand that you like them, that you want this to work, that you have a desire to work with them to make it, because you do, right? You don't want to go through this whole process of finding, training, hiring, and then let them go. That's costly to you, it's costly to the company, and it's not something you want to go through. So be honest about that. Be friendly about that. I really want this to work out. In your head, right, this is the other side of the conversation, the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The other side of the conversation is you really need to go into that conversation believing that this is not going to work out. Yes, I said that. Now, Dustin, what's so positive and optimistic about that? Well, here's the deal, okay? The positive, optimistic side is by telling them verbally you want it to work out. The reason you want in your head to believe it's not going to work out is that will cause you to be honest. That will cause you to not leave anything on the table. If you go into this only with the kind, gentle, I love you and want this to work out side of things, you will miss an opportunity, or you will not be as forceful as you need to be with the other side, which is, I want you to go into this conversation believing that it really won't work out. If you believe it won't work out, you'll be much more honest in your language, in your communication, right? You'll be able to say things like, when I hear you on the phone, I wonder what the other side is thinking. I struggle that you're not getting it. I really need this, this, and this to happen. And be very, very specific. If you go into that conversation believing that they just don't have what it takes to improve, and that this is an ultimatum meeting for nothing else, it's to allow you to make sure that there's not a surprise. I told you the story on this microphone before, but for those of you who are new to this program, the day that I fired Jonathan. Now, I had never met Jonathan. Jonathan was a long-distance hire. He came with a lot of, let's just say that I had a lot of high hopes for Jonathan, okay? A long resume of great customer service, and he just didn't work out. The day that I let him go, he truly, I believe, was being honest when he said, I had no idea that I was not living up to your expectations. Now, folks, that's embarrassing, and that's on me. The reason he had no idea is I thought it was being communicated through an office manager, but ultimately it was my responsibility. I'm not passing that on the office manager. That was my responsibility. I should have had one of these conversations about 2 weeks before I let him go, and then either let him figure it out or not figure it out, as the case may be, but at least it wouldn't be a surprise at that point. Okay? So the nice side of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is that you say things like, I want this to work out. I hired you for a reason. I have high hopes that we can still make this work. Okay? And then on the other side, and this is important as well, you need to be as open and as honest as you possibly can. Folks, I alluded to some webinars on my website about hiring right. There's a lot of steps here to make sure that you get it right. Even then, it's not a foolproof method, but I'm telling you folks, I've hired well over the last few years using the principles that you will find in that webinar. You can find it on my website, theappraisercoach.com/products.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.